All right, so today we're joined with Dr. Henry Charlier. He is a professor, he's a researcher, and a medicinal chemist. Mr. Charlier, do you want to say anything about yourself before we get started?
Well, I'm a Milwaukee Bucks fan, as you could tell. They won the NBA championship, so that's important to me. But I I went to college at the University of Wisconsin in Stevens Point, so a lot of different University of Wisconsin sites. It's not the Badgers, the main one. It's one of the smaller schools. I got a degree in chemistry and biology, and then went on to the Medical College of Wisconsin, where I got a PhD in biochemistry. And that's where I started to work on projects dealing with medical implications, drug design, and that kind of thing. And then I went to the University of Iowa, where I did a postdoctoral fellowship. And again, I did more work with, in particular, with things called enzymes, which are protein catalysts, and oftentimes are the targets of drugs. And then I came to Boise State University, where I'm a professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. And I do research in the area of cancer chemotherapy and deal with drug design and drug testing. So that's good enough, I think.
Yeah, that's for sure good enough. So just for a quick overview about today's workshop, so we'll start off with some basic questions asked by me and Mahir, then we'll move on to any Q&A questions you guys might have as well. So let's get started with the very first question. So we did a little bit of research on your Boise State profile, and it says that you're a contributor to 3 different research areas. So we're kind of wondering, how do you manage to contribute to all 3 of these research areas, considering research in even one topic is a very time-consuming profession?
Right. And to be fully honest, I really need to update my website, because I've kind of I stopped one of the projects altogether. And then so there are 3 areas that were listed on the website. One is working with nerve agents, like nerve warfare agents. And I studied an enzyme that actually breaks them down. And so I had some work with the Department of Defense to immobilize the enzyme and see if there are ways to get that to, with the idea of down the road, maybe you could embed fabrics and things like that with, and the truth is, I got that project's over with. It's been a while. I still have the clones for the enzyme. In fact, I was looking through my freezer and found some nerve agent in it, so I got to get rid of that. And then the other one I still work on, but I don't have any funding for it. So every now and then I'll find a student that seems like they're a little more advanced, because it's a tough problem. And that one has to do with alcohol metabolism in the body. And so I don't do as much with that. The main one I work on is dealing with the cancer chemotherapy now. But how do you manage it? You just do. Like with anything, you keep track of what all these different students are working on, because I don't actually get in the lab to do it. It's always my students that are doing the work. And so it's really my job to coordinate their efforts. Even in one project, and you're right to point out, that's a full-time thing on its own. Keeping things organized, and I try to keep spreadsheets on who's doing what and what did they recently do, and try to keep everything coherent. All of the research I do is with undergrads, so I'm not working with graduate students, and I'm not doing what I would call really intense research with a giant lab full of students. I used to do that a lot more, but these days I focused more on the educational end of things. And so we do research, and we're working on a manuscript now, and to publish, and on some of the work that we have. But it's all my job, really. I don't even get to have fun anymore. I like to go in the lab and I don't get to anymore. I get to take the data from all my different students, and each one has a small little piece of the project that they're working on, and it's my job to stitch it all together to tell one uniform story. And so it, oddly enough, the more advanced I get into the science, the less science I actually get to do in the lab. And I sit in front of a computer writing and tying things together more than anything anymore. It's still fun to get in the lab though, so sometimes I'll sneak in the lab when no one's there and do stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the part where you said you work with the Department of Defense. That's extremely cool. Can you kind of explain how that worked? Did you work in like a government laboratory for that?
No,
Or
no. What happened was there was it turned out to be one of those things where a friend of mine owned a company, and he got some funding from the DoD, Department of Defense, and he had a sub project where he needed someone with my area of expertise to do some work. So what I did was he gave money toward my project. I think it was, to begin with, it was like close to $100,000. And I did some research with, tied into that project. And so that's why I did the work. So it just, in this case, it just happened to be someone who was local that I knew. And it's funny, a lot of the research that gets done a lot of times is through your connections and your network of people. That's why going to conferences and talking to as many scientists as you can lead to really interesting productions and collaborations. And so that's how that happened. So I didn't think, oh, I want to write a grant and get money from the DoD. No, it wasn't that at all. It was, I was talking to a friend and he said, hey, do you know of any enzymes that could work with this nerve agent? And I said, boy, do I ever. And so I wrote to another person and I got a clone for the gene for that enzyme. And then in my lab, we got it to express an E. coli bacteria, and we purified that protein, and then we did things to it, essentially.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. But we also have another question about research in general. So sometimes research can get a little political. So have you ever had to deal with any pressure when it comes to like discovering new things in research? And if so, how have you coped with that?
I would say nothing I work on is truly that political. But since I'm in the area of academics, there are different approaches to doing science in academics versus industry, for instance. And in my case, the work I'm doing in academic science, a lot of it is we want to produce knowledge for the world to know and make it readily available. And when you're in industry, the idea is we need to make a discovery that we could then potentially use to make money. And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing, but like a drug company, for instance, they're in it to make money. But in order for them to be successful, they have to do good science. But they can't make that science known to the rest of the world because they have to protect their intellectual property. That's how they make money. They'll have a drug and they keep that stuff they protect it legally. And so when we made our first discovery in my lab, I wanted to just publish it. But then I learned that if I published it right away, then even if it was a really good potential drug, it would never make the clinic because you need a drug company or someone to take it over. I'm not a drug company. We're a university, right? And so you need to get that information. If you really think you have something that can help patients, you just can't publish it. And so what I wound up doing was I patented it. So the university helped, and we got a few patents on some of the drugs. And So I was excited because, wow, I got a patent. Maybe we could do something with that. And it turns out very few drug companies will want to license a patent from a university unless like all the work is done. And I wasn't at that point. So in a way, that's not really political, but it shows kind of a barrier that I had to dodge around in order, if you have a good idea that could save lives possibly, that's not good enough to get it to patients. You have to try to protect that so that a company could take it and make money with it. And I know that sounds kind of heartless, but I actually get it. We live in a capitalistic society, and it takes a lot of money to produce a drug on market for, I don't know what the current numbers are, but it's something along these lines. For every drug that makes it to market, a drug company spends about $1 billion plus, and that's with a B, $1 billion plus. So they do a lot of investment into R&D, and a lot of those projects fail and they never make it to the market. So the few that make it, they try to make work well, and they try to stack the deck so that the success of their product is more guaranteed. And so what I found is, even if I have a good idea, it's never going to probably make it into the clinic like I had hoped. So it let me down. It made me feel bad about it. So I've already decided, after all that, I'm just publishing stuff from now on.
So since you work in an academic institution mainly, what's your like most favorite part of work?
Students, 100%. It is by far the reason why I wanted to go into be a professor. I love working with students, and there's something about seeing a student succeed that I find enormously rewarding. And if I could say, hey, I had something to do with that, that's even better. And so when I have my research students, when I see the light go on and they make a discovery and they're so excited, and yet they try to tell their parents what they did, and their parents have no idea because they don't understand how technical it is and everything they did. But the idea is they did something they never, ever imagined they were capable of doing. They were working on something they never dreamt of. And here they are as an undergraduate in college, making a big discovery. One of the patents I have, I'm very proud of, because one of the co-inventors was an undergrad with me. He was a very industrious student. I mean, this guy, he looked at all the information we had, and I know Mahir and Rashid, you guys kind of have a sense of what goes on in a lab like that, but we had a bunch of lead compounds and things that looked really promising. And so this student looked at all those things and he said, what would happen if we had a molecule that had this function or that function? And so he went and he went and looked in all of the drug catalogs, because rather than make it, first thing we do is say, can we buy it? Because that's the easiest thing to do. And so I bought a bunch of different compounds based on his ideas, based on our discussions. And I remember one he was really excited about, and it came in at the end. It was like 5 p.m. So it was right toward the end of not the end of my work day, but a typical work day, end at 5. And I shot him an email and I said, hey, your compound came in. I put it on the workbench, just so you know. Well, I came in the next morning. Here, this guy came in that evening around 8, worked all night. And when I came in the morning, he had just found that it was the record best inhibitor we have ever found for that enzyme, best in the world record best, like the most powerful. And he had a hand in that. He got excited, and that got me excited. Anyway, so working with students is number one. Number two is I do like learning. And so between teaching and doing research, I'm always learning. And that's key, obviously, because science is always moving. In fact, what we know is growing at exponential rate. It's impossible to really keep up with. And so every day that I can learn and feel like got this old mind working, I love that part too. Long answer to a short question.
Yeah, so you brought up a really good point in your speech just right now that science is expanding and growing. And along with that, a lot of technology is expanding and growing too. So where do you think your field will be in a couple of years?
Honestly, I'm blown away by where it is right now. It's already beyond where I imagined just 5 years ago. The technologies that are being used are, if I were to think about it, I don't even understand them myself. I'm learning them myself. And so I'll go to a conference and I'll learn about a new technology. And it seems like how they must have felt when they found out that the earth was actually round. You know, it's those kinds of big, like huge discoveries. And one, you know, a few that come to mind are just, it's hard to appreciate, but there's this topic called protein folding. So when a protein folds, it adopts a three-dimensional shape. And when that three-dimensional shape is formed, comes the function of the protein. All the proteins are like little molecular machines that do the work of the cell and living organisms. And so we always thought if you could predict how a protein was going to fold before you ever knew how it folded, that would be like the holy grail. And we're pretty far off from that now, I admit. However, we're actually pretty good too. Now I can give my students a primary structure, which is just a sequence of amino acids that make a protein. And there are free softwares out there now that do a really amazing job at predicting how they're going to fold and what the three-dimensional structure is. And I never thought that in a million years. And by the way, that's old news. That's like 5 years ago news. The way that they study how many, there's a whole field called proteomics. And so they can study all of the proteins that are made in a cell, and they can figure out which ones are growing and which ones are shrinking in response to, say, a drug treatment or a disease. And this is no small task. There are, 30 to 40,000 proteins and sometimes more, depending on what organism you're looking at. And trying to keep track of all those at once is tricky, but yet they do it. Thanks to things like supercomputing power and just techniques known as mass spectrometry and the way that they think through it. It blows my mind what people are able to do. It's just crazy. And so keeping up is a big challenge. So what I try to do is in the primary literature, I try to see here's where teaching helps. I try to, in my teaching, read papers to keep me up to date with the newest technology. Now, the way science works, I don't have to learn the technology. I just have to find someone else who does. And then I can collaborate with them. I can bring my expertise, join it with theirs, and we can get things done much faster that way than if I had to then learn all the new techniques and try to keep up. And by the way, it's expensive. Technology is expensive. Some of the instrumentation that we use in my research, I use really simple stuff, like the simplest of simple. And the cheapest ones are $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 just for the equipment. This really fancy stuff that you see going on, you're talking millions. We have an old nuclear magnetic resonance spectrometer. At the time, it cost $800,000. Now it's quite a bit more. And the new ones, though, can do quite a bit more, but it's just very expensive. And so I'm blown away by what I'm seeing people develop and just how smart people are. It really is crazy. So keeping up is the big deal. And the way you do it is you read the primary literature. You try to keep an eye on what's happening out there. So you're not only trying to figure out what's new in terms of what they're finding, in terms of the scientific facts, but how are they doing it? That's the thing. And there's fads, just like in clothing and everything else. There's scientific fads. New technologies come and everyone's doing it. Everyone wants one. Everyone's, you know, and in that process, you know, some people don't understand what's working, but yet they can do it because the computing and backup that's there, the software, they don't have to even know what they're doing, and they could push a few buttons and some amazing things can happen. And so anyway, that's again a long question, but it's always the challenge. This is moving at incredible speed. When I was younger, I had a telephone that actually was stuck on the wall. And if I wanted to call someone, I had to pick up the phone, and there was a wire connecting the phone so that I couldn't even walk away, and I'd be dialing, like I dialed like this. Now I'm wearing a watch that I can call people on. When I was a kid, only was that on TV, and they were always like superheroes, you know, and they're talking to their, but now it's, everyone has that technology. So it's just crazy to see how this grows. And it's really cool. And you guys, I don't even know what you're going to see. So 5 years from now, what am I going to see? I can't even begin to imagine, because I'm already beyond what we're doing now, is way beyond anything I ever imagined. That was my long answer. It's fascinating. The more you understand, the more you don't know. That's how I look at it. That's how I know when people are ready to graduate from college, when they think, oh, I'm not that smart. Okay, you're ready to graduate. That means you have a picture of how much there really is out there that you don't know.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of good stuff in that speech, especially like a lot of the technology you don't even know is out there, and like there's a lot of whole bunch of new people out there who know how to access that technology, how to use that technology, and all of that. I feel like me and Mahir can really relate to that as well, because like we worked in the lab, and there was a whole bunch of new people, new atmosphere, new tech we didn't even know existed, and now we were able to kind of understand like, okay, this is kind of how it works, and this is what its purpose is. And a lot of good stuff you mentioned about like the scientific literature, keeping up to date with that, because it seems like there's a new scientific discovery like every day. So that's a really cool thing which you brought up.
More than one every day.
Yeah.
I'll say that. My old boss, he used to say, it was kind of a funny thing. I had spent probably 3 months of solid work trying to figure something out. And I had read the literature, but I didn't find the right thing. And after about 3 months, I had determined that what I was trying to do probably wasn't possible. And then I found like 2 papers that showed that. So I'd wasted 2 months, 3 months, because I didn't find the right thing in the literature. So he always said, why spend one afternoon in the library when you can spend 6 months in the lab? The idea being, you got to read the primary literature and try to keep up as best as you can. And that's no small task, because it's not just one discovery a day. It's thousands of discoveries a day. Thousands. It just mind blowing.
Yeah, the news is always updating. Like Apple News has like all these research discoveries, and like the COVID vaccine came out a lot faster than most people expected. So yeah, I can definitely understand.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, is they were able to get through the things you guys mentioned before, the politics of it. And there's a big thing about politics, right? There's some of, we call it red tape sometimes, but sometimes that red tape's really important. You don't want to give something that you think is going to be good for someone, and then it has a bad side effect and kills them. That's obviously not a good thing. So there's that fine balance. We had an emergency situation, and vaccine development isn't all that new. And so it wasn't like they were doing like brand new stuff to science. They were just following typical routines to make a vaccine. And so that was able to get through quicker. But it's a tough one. Yeah. It's always moving fast, always something new. And a lot of what's funny is just like with the fads I mentioned. Like I actually was alive during the 70s, and then in the like 90s and even the early, 2000s, I saw some of those trends come right back again. They became popular again. And you see the same thing with science. People get on something and then they move to something else and then move to something else. And they're like, hey, you know what? Did you ever know about this? And you'd go like, yeah, that was like 10 years ago. We did that. And so it just keeps cycling. So sometimes I think science moves so fast that people forget what we've even learned.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yep.
All right, now we want to ask some questions from people in the chat. Someone asked, what year did you get your PhD?
You really want to know that? 1997.
I'm just wondering, where did you get it from? I think you already mentioned this.
Yeah, I did. From the Medical College of Wisconsin. It's the biggest private medical school in the nation. And even though it's a medical school, they do the basic sciences in the medical field. So like things like biochemistry, physiology, molecular biology, microbiology, all of those things, pharmacology, they typically are housed in a medical school. And that's because medical students need to learn those things. So they bring in professors to do that. And the professors do their research. And so they need grad students. And so they have graduate programs. So a lot of medical schools will have graduate programs and offer graduate degrees. So even though I went to the medical college, I did not get an MD or a physician degree. I got a degree, a PhD, Doctorate of Philosophy. Did you know that's what PhD stands for? Doctor of Philosophy. And it's not really something that it's not like you become a philosopher, but the PhD is you get at sort of the way that people think in your field. How do you solve problems? How do you address problems? And quite frankly, if I were to give you guys some advice, you need to be focusing on learning how to learn. It sounds like an odd thing to say, but if you can learn new things, because by the time something winds up in a textbook for you, that's old news. And it's probably outdated even to some extent. That's how fast science is moving. Like they say, a person who starts college will be needing to learn how to use technologies, in the area of STEM, need to use technologies that don't exist to address problems that they don't know exists either. So if you spend all your time memorizing a bunch of facts, in quotes, instead of learning how to apply them and solve problems with them and advance your thinking, you're going to be left behind for sure. So it doesn't, just because you know stuff about DNA does mean nothing unless you can actually apply it to solve a problem.
Yeah, I agree. Problem solving skills can be extremely important, especially in this day and age.
I think it's everything, honestly.
Yeah.
And my greatest skill in science is writing, which sounds odd. You're like, what about math? What about, although those are important, but how do I, in order to do research, it costs money. How do you get money? Writing. When you, and you have to make a good persuasive argument, and you have to convince the governmental agency or wherever you're trying to get grant money from that what your idea is good enough to throw money at. And I already mentioned how expensive research is. Like if you hire people, they're expensive. People are expensive if you're going to hire someone. And so I might have a $400,000 grant, which I don't currently, but I've had them. And a lot of that money, probably, I don't know, 85% goes to hiring people. And the rest is for like supplies and stuff. And maybe you can get some piece of equipment that you need or something like that to do your work. So but being able to write and expressed yourself in written form, I never appreciated how important that was in science. And if you go into industry, it's the same thing. You have to be able to express your ideas in writing, and then those who are in charge of what direction the company is going to go, they're going to need to read that and be able to communicate. So obviously, yes, you got to know your math, you got to know your scientific principles, but writing turned out to be so much more important than I ever imagined. I always said I was a journalist before I was a scientist. And it's kind of true.
Yeah, in the previous workshop, we were just talking about how important communicating your results are after an experiment.
Yeah. Because if you don't communicate it, then to the rest of the world, it never happened. And then your science benefits nobody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So since we don't have any more questions left in the chat and we're basically out of time, do you have any last words? I know you've given us a lot of advice today, but any last words for the audience?
Yeah, I do. Just remember that a career is something you have control over. And if you want to pursue a career in an area, and at your age, it's quite possible that you think you know what you want to do with your life. Be it you want to be a physician or a researcher or engineer. You don't have to make a commitment right now to it. You can take steps, come to things like this, do well in school, study hard and all that stuff. That's all important. But in the end, what you may find is there may be things out there that are beyond what you ever imagined and might be more along the lines of something you're interested in doing. So in other words, keep an open mind. It's really, from a college professor, I can't tell you how many times I see people change their majors. And they think, I want to be a doctor. And then they do research and they're like, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a scientist. This is way too cool. And then I've had people literally, I want to be a scientist. And they get their degree in chemistry. And then they decide, I don't want to be a chemist. And so after getting his degree, he went, this one guy in particular, he was one of my research students. He goes and he wanted to go into business. So he went and got his MBA in business. And then, you ever see that show Shark Tank? Okay. He was on it. He developed a glasses system where they could swap out lenses. Had nothing to do with chemistry, yet the chemistry in those things helped him to think critically and problem solve. So he just didn't like the field he was in. And he went and did that. And he was named Forbes top 30 under 30 in the nation in terms of successful businessmen. And here's what he did. He went to the Shark Tank, okay? Someone offered him like 150,000. They turned it down. It wasn't good enough. And so they went on and did their own thing. And then I think they sold that company and he went off and now he's doing other things, but he's been very successful. And it's so funny. When I knew him, he seemed really interested in science, but after he did it, he changed gears and still used the science in his educational background and did something else. And it doesn't make him a bad person. I guess that's what I'm telling you. So if you want to be a scientist, then by golly, go for it. If you want to be an engineer, then by golly, go for it. But you're never trapped into that. And I've just mentioned that to you when you're younger, so you can hear that and know that no one's going to, maybe your parents are pushing you one way or another, but parents, I'm a parent. We get it. We understand after a while. And eventually that works. My son started off as an engineering major and changed it to English. They both have ENG, but boy, are they different. And I'm okay with that. And it's what his passion is. And he can make a living doing it. That's another thing. You got to be able to earn your way through. Some majors, I wonder how they'll do that, honestly. But anyway, that's my advice. Hopefully I didn't talk too much and say things that were irrelevant to you, but it was a pleasure meeting with y'all.
Yeah, that was some pretty great advice. Hopefully the audience could take some notes on that. With that being said, it was a great workshop, but we have to end it over here.
Yep.
If you guys want to keep meeting Dr. Henry, you can feel free to attend Rosetta workshops. That's where me and Mahir found out about him, and he's a really great teacher over there too.
And you can also hit up Mahir and Rashid if you have email. Do they have your email? Have you
Yeah, they have our email.
You can send them my email. That's
Sure.
fine.
Yeah, we'll make sure to send you guys out there Dr. Henry's email as well. So if you guys have any questions or just want to learn a little bit more about science, you can feel free to ask
Yeah,
him.
and if you want to get specific about things, being what's it like to go to college, or I want to do this science thing, what do I, talk more specific about what you want, I'm happy to do that. All right, good to see y'all.
Yeah. All right, we'll see you guys in our next workshop at 4:15, and thank you, Dr. Henry.
Yep.
Bye,
Bye. We'll see you guys.
Bye.